Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
Hello, Callie. We are going to talk about nerdy things today, so I thought that I would bring out the stereotypical nerdy voice.
Of course you would.
It's okay, it's not racist because I'm a nerd myself, so I'm allowed to do it.
Oh gosh, it's always interesting with thinking about what you're gonna do, trying to figure that whole thing out.
Nobody knows, not even me. I'm like Captain Underpants. My identity is so secret, even I don't know who I am.
Oh, that's deep.
I know, that sounded like a lot sadder than I meant it to sound. I'm gonna get so many emails. Are you okay?
Well, are you?
Sure, I guess.
So this week we're gonna take on a bit more of a lighthearted topic. It's not entirely lighthearted because it is something that I think is really important to talk about, and it's something that I think kind of gets dismissed a lot of times in broader society. So what we're going to talk about today is fandoms and nerdy things, and what they mean to us. And I posted something on Facebook asking people to talk about fandoms and what they've meant to people and ways in which fandoms have helped people. And I think I'm on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages of copied and pasted response in the show notes here.
That's a lot of content.
Right. So before we get into the meat of the show, a couple of things I wanted to talk about first. There's a couple of events that I want to talk about and promote because they're going to be awesome. So coming up on July 7th, the Tri-State Freethinkers, which is our local atheist group here in Cincinnati, has organized a protest of the Ark Encounter opening. So without going hugely into what this monstrosity is, suffice it to say, Answers in Genesis is opening a theme park surrounding a quote-unquote recreation of Noah's Ark that they've gotten tons of money in tax breaks for and are still allowed to tell their employees they can't be gay and they can't have sex if they're unmarried. They're still allowed to do all of those things, even though they're getting, I think it's $18 million in tax breaks from the state of Kentucky. So we're going to be there to protest. It's going to be a great time. There's going to be a lot of really cool people there. Aaron Ra, Dan Barker, Jim Helton, who's the president of Tri-State Freethinkers, and David Silverman, and me. So after the party, or after yeah, I say after the party, it's going to be a party. After the main protest, we're actually doing an after party at the University of Cincinnati where we're doing, it's almost kind of a mini convention, a rally of sorts. And I'm going to be speaking there along with some of the aforementioned people. So it's going to be really awesome. If you're in the area or have the ability to get here, it's going to be a great time with lots of great people there. So I definitely recommend coming out if that's a thing you can do. That same weekend, July 8th through 10th, is the Secular Student Alliance Convention in Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to be giving a presentation there about why Secular Student Alliance groups and Gay Straight Alliance groups should be working together. It's going to be awesome. There's a ton of speakers there. Lots of really great people that I'm really excited about. It's going to be a great time. So again, if you can, you should totally come. And then we're going to start talking regularly. I'm going to introduce the introduction to the segment here just because this is the first time we've done it. Yeah, it's in introductionception.
Yeah,
there's a joke in there somewhere. So as we talked about on the podcast before, we are now a blog on Patheos. It's patheos.com/blogs/the Gaytheist Manifesto. And we're going to set aside a couple of minutes each week just to kind of talk about what's going on the blog. So Ari, why don't you talk to us about what's been going on the blog lately?
So, well, the most recent article that I posted was on June 22nd. Probably by the time that this episode comes out, I'll have another article up. Let's see, this is going to come out on the 30th. I'm planning to release another article on the 30th. Every 2 weeks, I'm doing a bi-weekly bigotry review where I just summarize some recent news articles from the last 2 weeks about just people being dumb in the name of religion and just giving my thoughts on it. So the next one's going to be coming out on Thursday the 30th. I've already got lots of topics to talk about, mostly people being dumb about Orlando, of course. But I'm sure a lot of that is going to get whittled down. And then recently I posted an article called Living with a Religious Loved One, The Untold Story, which I'm extremely proud of.
It's one of my favorite things that I've ever read. You should check it out. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm working on a post right now about Steven Anderson, the preacher who said that the Orlando guy didn't go far enough and who has said other very, very colorful things about the gay community and trans people and that kind of stuff. So if any of that sounds interesting, go check it out. It's Patheos.
Or not, whatever.
Well, right, yeah.
You don't care.
I mean, we kind of care.
Only a little bit. I try not to care, because then I only just get disappointed in the end.
That's fair, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
Let's set a low bar.
Exactly.
All right. So
if you don't have any expectations, your expectations can't be thwarted.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Hashtag life advice from Ari.
Just don't be a therapist, please. So as mentioned before, we're going to be talking about nerdy things this week. And there's a couple of reasons why I think this is important to talk about, because obviously not ever made a secret that I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But I think what gets lost in these things a lot of times is people don't just like these things because they like starships or because they like aliens or like having encyclopedic knowledge about a fictional universe and that kind of thing.
Although that is part of it.
No, that's totally part of it, and that stuff's cool. And I am all of those things. But there's also the side of, a lot of times these shows and books and comic books and movies, they have a special place in our hearts because of the way that we can relate to certain characters or certain statements that they had made about morality and those kinds of things. And that's part of the reason that I love Star Trek so much, is that it was the first place where I saw a bunch of people who were very, very different from each other working together, and they weren't afraid of their differences. They didn't try and act like they were all the same. They actively talked about the ways that they're different, and this culture is this way, this culture is this way, and differing customs and how you should have respect for differences and you should celebrate differences. And there were lots of really great allegories to LGBT issues. There was never an outright openly gay or openly trans character in any Star Trek, which Brian Fuller, I think, is the name of the producer of the new one. If you're listening, and I know you are.
Oh, yes, of course.
Wink, wink. We need a gay and or trans character in the new Star Trek series. Because in an interview, he said it's going to continue exploring progressive themes, quote unquote. So that's a thing that we need to do. So Star Trek is kind of the big one for me, but I'm also a big Doctor Who fan, really big Battlestar Galactica fan, and those kind of things. Ari, what kind of stuff are you into, nerdy wise?
I am an otaku. I like anime and manga.
This is
it
awesome.
Makes me feel a little bit embarrassed, but not really, because I'm not really that ashamed of it. I've been into it since I was like 12 years old. I'm 24 now, so that's 12 years. It's not really a phase for me.
Right.
Although mostly I'm not really watching any new stuff. I'm just watching the older stuff that has a lot of nostalgic value for me for the most part. But yeah, like Full Metal Alchemist is my favorite. Prince of Tennis, I actually only watched enough of the show to like understand who the characters were, and then just read a shit ton of fan fiction about it. So Prince of Tennis is a big one for me. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of them. I could go on, but...
So one thing in particular in Star Trek that really meant a lot to me is there's an episode called The Outcast. It's a Star Trek The Next Generation episode. And the plot is the crew encounters this species that has no gender. And they have... Baby. What's that?
I said, yeah, baby.
Yeah. Ari was actually in the show. But it's really interesting, the conversations that they have. I don't know that it was purposely an allegory for trans issues. I think they were trying to make a statement about homosexuality. But if you listen to the conversations they have in the show where they talk about, what's world like, or what's life like in a world without gender. And there's conversations about
Freaking
how
awesome.
people,
That's what it's like.
yeah. And there's conversations about how they procreate, how dating and that kind of stuff works. And it's like, you can hear in the questions that they ask, it's like so much of the same stuff that trans people get asked all the time. And I went back and watched it recently, and it was just, it was mind blowing to me because, even as a kid, I watched it so many times over and over and over again. But, because I wasn't, fully accepting of myself at the time, I don't know that I necessarily got how deep that connection went. And there were lots of other things too. There are lots of humanist themes in Star Trek, talking about, there's one point where Captain Picard even talks about, a culture leaving behind religion as an achievement, which is pretty awesome. Right. And then, and then Doctor Who, has an openly, pansexual character, Captain Jack Harkness. And it's really interesting the way that it's treated in Doctor Who, because it never really gets called out as anything that's odd. It's just who he is, and everyone's like, oh, that guy, because what the joke with this guy is just that he flirts and wants to have sex with everyone. And that's kind of the joke. It has nothing to do with who he's attracted to or who he has sex with. So Ari, are there things like that in anime that, have kind of helped you figure out who you are or anything like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Anime has, there's specific subgenres of anime and manga called yaoi and shonen ai, and shonen ai, it means literally boys love, and it's just like romantic relationships between two male characters pretty much. And then yaoi is a more sexual version of that, typically more explicit, but it really, in a weird way, helped me kind of delve into queer things when I was a teenager, especially when I was like really closeted and not able to be open about my sexuality because of my family. It was definitely an outlet for me to explore queer themes, and I would read and write a lot of fan fiction about male characters, falling in love with each other, and it just made me feel like I had like a little bit of a community online, and a place where I could feel all my queerness and not necessarily have to talk about it, in real life.
Could you recommend any specific shows if someone was interested?
Oh
like
man,
me,
there are
because
a lot.
I'm very interested.
Oh, one that you might like is called Loveless. It's a shonen ai manga and anime as well. It's got some bondage type themes, so I think that's why you might like it.
All right.
Yeah, and sacrifice and being tied literally and figuratively to other people. But it's also kind of, I wouldn't recommend it if you're not into like older men and younger people. So, yeah, one of the characters is like 12 or 13, and the other one is in his early 20s. So if that's something you're sensitive to, don't watch that show.
Yeah, not sure I'd like that very much. Yeah, and this is all really interesting to me because anime is kind of a new thing for me. I never, actively disliked or hated anime or anything like that. I had just never really seen any that I had really caught on to. And Celeste is hugely into anime, and we've been trading back and forth. She's been watching episodes of Star Trek, and I've been watching with her a bunch of the different anime that she's into. And I've actually started to really get into some of it. There's a show called Sword Art Online, which is amazing. The other one I can't remember the name of. I feel like a jerk.
No.
I know, yeah. But like she's always just talking, oh, there's a show you gotta watch, there's a show you gotta watch, and it's like, and then she goes through and explains, well, this is what this character means to me, and this is what this character means to me. And it's so cool because I think one of the things that I saw a meme on Facebook once that it's not surprising that it made me cry because everything makes me cry. But it was like talking about listening to someone like totally nerd out on something that they're really into. And it doesn't even have to be like sci-fi or anime or anything like that. I mean, it can just be about something that somebody loves a whole lot. I mean, sports or the outdoors or anything like that. So they go on and on nerding out, talking about how much they love this thing. And then at the end of it, they apologize.
Yeah.
And it's so sad to me that people feel like they have to do that. Like, I love this thing so much, and I'm going to talk about how much I love this thing, but at some point in a person's life, they've been taught that that's something that, you know, they should keep to themselves, or something that's to be embarrassed about, or something along those lines. And I mean, I even kind of have a little bit of that. You know, I mean, obviously I'm going to bore people who aren't into Star Trek if I'm going into a huge dissertation on Federation politics or something like that. You know, but it's sometimes I feel like if there's even something that's relevant, you know, somebody brings something up in a conversation and I think like, ooh, wow, there's an episode of Star Trek that deals with this. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't even bring it up because everybody's just like, oh God, here she goes again. You know, and I hate that so much. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do an episode about this kind of thing is this video that I saw on YouTube. And the video is Will Wheaton, who plays the character Wesley Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation. And basic bio about him, when the show starts, he's 17 years old. He's kind of a shitheaded little kid, but he's like the smartest guy in the room a lot of times. And you kind of find out that he's special, like Mozart is what an alien character says to him once. And he's at a convention on a discussion panel, and this little girl, she, judging by her voice, she couldn't have been more than like 9 or 10. And she asks him, you know, were you ever made fun of for being a nerd as a kid? And his response is incredible. And I'm gonna play that because it's absolutely amazing.
When you were a kid, were you called a nerd? And if so, how did you deal with it?
When I was a little boy, I was called a nerd all the time because I didn't like sports. I loved to read. I liked math and science. I thought school was really cool. And it hurt a lot because it's never okay when a person makes fun of you for something like you didn't choose. You know, we don't choose to be nerds. We can't help it that we like these things, and we shouldn't apologize for liking these things. I wish that I could tell you that there's a really easy way to just not care, but the truth is it hurts. But here's the thing that you might be able to understand. As a matter of fact, I'm confident you'll be able to understand this because you asked this question. When a person makes fun of you, when a person is cruel to you, it has nothing to do with you. It's not about what you said. It's not about what you did. It's not about what you loved. It's about them feeling bad about themselves. They feel sad. They don't get positive attention from their parents. They don't feel as smart as you. They don't understand the things that you understand. Maybe one of their parents is really pushing them to be a cheerleader or a baseball player or an engineer or something that they just don't want to do. So they take that out on you because they can't go and be mean to the person who's actually hurting them. So when a person is cruel to you like that, I know that this is hard, but honestly, the kind and best reaction is to pity them. And don't let them make you feel bad because you love a thing. Maybe find out what they love and talk about how they love it. I bet you find out that a person who loves tetherball exactly the same way that you love Dr. Who. But you just love different things. And I will tell you this, it absolutely gets better as you get older. And I know it's really hard when you're in school and you're surrounded by the same 400 people a day that pick on you and make you feel bad about yourself. But there's 50,000 people here this weekend who went through the exact same thing, and we're all doing really well. Don't you ever let a person make you feel bad because you love something they decided is only for nerds. You're loving things for you. Thanks for your question.
How incredible is that?
Oh, I wish someone had told me that when I was like 13 years old. I could have really used that advice.
I was just about to say that.
This is really bringing back memories from middle school for sure.
Yeah, well, and you know, it was the same thing, and I was lucky. I mean, I wasn't hardcore bullied as a kid, but definitely I was treated as kind of anachronistic. We'll put it that way. I was like, oh, that, and obviously this is me pre-transition, so it was, that's just that weird boy who's into Star Trek and we just leave him alone. You know what I mean? It was,
yeah.
You know what I mean? So a lot of it wasn't really overt. And of course, when I dressed up like a Klingon to perform a Klingon ritual as part of a class project, that,
I'm sure you could tell.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yep. I did so many things just like that.
Well, come on. You gotta tell.
Well, you know, I did get made fun of. I went to a small private school where everyone knows everybody's business. So everyone knew that I and my little group of friends were really into anime and fantasy novels and all sorts of other things. So we got made fun of a lot because we weren't quote unquote normal. And, you know, I can understand some of that because I did definitely take it to an extreme because it was my like escape. It was like my little happy world. I was, you know, dealing with tough things at home and undiagnosed mental illness that wasn't diagnosed until a long time later. And I just like had my one thing that I was clinging on to that was making me happy and was something that I could talk about with my friends and feel like we had our own little special world. And I did feel bad when people would make fun of me, but I also felt kind of defiant about it. Like, this is the thing that makes me happy, and I'm not really sure why you can't just let me have that, even though I'm sure I annoyed a lot of people talking about it all the time.
Yeah, like, I sincerely wish that everyone had something that they could nerd over. And it, like I said, it doesn't even have to, I mean, obviously we're talking about it in the context of like comics and anime and sci-fi and that kind of stuff. And that's what's generally associated with being nerdy. But because I've said it before, and it sounds kind of funny, but I honestly believe this is true, and that nerd love is a special kind of love, right? It's the kind of love, and I don't mean like the way Celeste and I love each other, even though that is part of it, but I mean the way that nerds love the things they nerd over, right?
Oh, yes.
Like, there was a time where I was almost fluent in a fictional language. What possible use could that have for my life? You know what I mean? I had one other friend in real life who was a Star Trek fan at the time. You know what I mean? But it was something that I loved so much. I just wanted to be so immersed in it. And because it made me feel okay with who I was, and I loved being there. And like, I knew that, and this is me thinking as a kid, obviously, but I knew if I lived in that world, nothing that was different about me would matter.
Yes.
You know, and I want everyone to love something that much. And I'm not a sports fan, but it can be sports. You know what I mean? I'm one of those people who sometimes makes like sports ball jokes or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think there is something a bit superficial in some ways, the way people treat sports, but there are people who see it as a genuine source of inspiration. You know, these are people who, you know, they grew up on the streets and now they're doing this thing because they have this talent and it's something that they worked really hard for. And it's something, you know, it's a great story of human achievement and what you can do if you work really hard and those kind of things. And even though sports isn't something that I'm really that personally into, I can appreciate that at some level. And I know, like, there are people who are into sports who appreciate it on that level. And I think that's amazing. And I wish everyone had that. I wish it so bad.
I just want to add, this is completely off topic, but I'm sitting here while we record this in my living room, and I look over, and my partner Zach is on his computer. He's reading manga. I love this.
And you know what, for reference, tell us what manga is, because that's something that I kind of only just recently learned what it was. Because I actually used to think manga was another word for anime.
No, manga is Japanese comics, and typically anime is a cartoon that is based off of a manga. So, like, for example, if you take Fullmetal Alchemist, which is my favorite, it first came out as a manga, and then they started adapting it into an anime. So it's got these two different forms. It's So there's usually a manga version and an anime version, but not always. Sometimes it's just one or the other. So
Gotcha.
it's just comic books, pretty much.
Yeah, and Celeste is really into those too, and it's been so awesome having kind of all of this opened up to me, because at first I kind of feel like this is a really weird thing to compare it to, but it fits because these are two things that kind of recently came into my life. It's kind of like me discovering that I didn't hate alcohol. Mm-hmm. Because I just assumed that there wasn't any of it that I would like, because I tried a little bit of it and I didn't like it very much. And it's kind of the same way, you know, like I knew there was a ton of anime out there and I'd seen a couple and was just like, I don't hate it. If people like it, that's totally cool. It's just not something that really seems interesting to me. And this whole entire world has been opened up to me now, and it's amazing. So I would definitely encourage, my first one was Attack on Titan, which is
too scary for me, but I saw part of the first episode and then people were getting eaten and I was like, yeah, no more.
Right. And I'm going to, anything that's referenced here, I'm going to try and remember to put in the show notes, because there's probably a lot of people who may not necessarily have heard of these things before. Obviously, everyone knows Star Trek and Doctor Who, but
if you want to talk anime, definitely contact me. Right. I will talk to you for a long time about it.
I wanted to close this segment out of just, Ari and I just kind of talking back and forth. There is, to kind of give folks the level on which this stuff can be really meaningful so I was talking about this Star Trek episode earlier, The Outcast, where they meet this species that has no gender. And towards the end of the episode, what you find out is that this species not only doesn't have gender, but gender is considered like backwards and unsophisticated and unevolved. And there are people in their society who are still born with gender. And these people are forced into corrective therapy for being a person with gender.
Like a nice little parallel there. And it's like there's a YouTube video that's like, what if everyone in the world was gay and you were straight? And it's like they called straight people breeders and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And at this point in the episode also, the first officer, Commander Riker, has fallen in love with one of these people, and she had revealed to him that she was actually born female. And she talks about how people who are born this way live secretive lives, and they're always afraid of being caught, and all of and it's just, it's such a strong analogy to the way that homosexuality and being transgender is viewed in society even today. And so she actually gets kind of put on trial for being female. And there's a monologue towards the end of the episode that's like, it's really hard for me to watch it and not lose it, because it's such the episode came out in 1992, January of 1992.
That's when I was born.
Well, I was 8.
You're so old.
Hey, I was only 8, okay?
That's old. 8 is old. I'm ancient.
So this is the monologue. I am female. I was born that way. I've had those feelings, those longings all of my life. It is not unnatural. I am not sick because I feel this way. I do not need to be helped. I do not need to be cured. What I need, and what all of those who are like me need, is your understanding and your compassion. We have not injured you in any way, and yet we are scorned and attacked, and all because we are different. What we do is no different from what you do. We talk and laugh, we complain about work, and we wonder about growing old. We talk about our families, and we worry about the future. And we cry with each other when things seem hopeless. All of the loving things that you do with each other, that is what we do. And for that we are called misfits and deviants and criminals. What right do you have to punish us? What right do you have to change us? What makes you think you can dictate how people love each other? Star Trek The Next Generation in 1992, my friends. All right, so we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to go through as much as we can of the response that I got on Facebook when I added this.
So much stuff.
I'm going to apologize in advance if we don't get to someone's, because like I said, at size 11 font, single space, there's 9 pages. So more Gay Theist Manifesto right after this.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends.
In biology,
In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today
The only thing I didn't learn today
the only thing I didn't learn
Is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov.
Hi, this is Trav Mamone of the By Any Means podcast. The By Any Means podcast is a weekly show where I interview guests about the intersections of social justice and humanism. Just go to www.byanymeans.com, that's by spelled B-I, to hear the podcast and read the blog. Because, hey, aren't we all a little bi-curious?
Do you know where Saskatchewan is? Probably not. It's in Canada. If you do, you might know a city named Regina. In Regina, there's a studio. And in that studio, there are, at least once a month, a bunch of skeptical atheist geeks and goofballs who get together to do a podcast. We are the Brainstorm crew, and we're trying to help spread a bit of reason and critical thinking while still having fun. Never taking things too seriously, but still not accepting everything we're told. We go through different topics, exploring them in depth, and often disagreeing. We try to stick to provable facts, and we never trust in myth. That's why we say we're woo-free since 2013. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spreaker under Brainstorm, or check out our website, brainstormblog.net. I can't promise you'll always agree with us, but I can promise you'll have fun listening to us.
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Philip and Joel. Thank you all so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gay Theist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gay Theist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking about nerdy things, nerdiness, and all things fandom. So in this segment, as I said before, we got a hugely kind of ridiculous response on Facebook when...
It's almost like people really like this stuff.
Right, yeah, weird. And there's some stuff in here that Ari and I didn't talk about in the first segment, which is good stuff. So I'm going to start with the first one. Trav said that Captain Jack Harkness from Doctor Who and Torchwood was a huge inspiration. The Doctor never freaked out about his pansexuality. He was only annoyed with Jack flirting with everyone while they were trying to save the universe.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that earlier, right?
Yeah, I did. And it's awesome. I mean, because there's an episode where there's an elderly lesbian couple that are in, it's long story, but there's an elderly lesbian couple. No one thinks twice about it. And, you know, there's part of me that wants those things to be called out in TV shows, because obviously the world we live in is the world where we have to push those things into being normalized. But I definitely also appreciate it being just another aspect of someone that's not...
Yeah, exactly. Like, nobody cares. It's just how they are.
Right. Yeah. So, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, Matthew said X-Men. I grew up as sort of the odd child out with all my medical issues. So when I learned about genetics in junior high and how it tied in with the concept of people born with their superpowers, it provided something I could relate to. These characters that faced being ostracized, as I felt I was from both my friends and my family because of my health issues, simply because of how they were born, that was a huge connection and outlet for me.
Yeah, so first of all, trans people are X-Men. Just want to throw that out there.
Whoa, I didn't know that. What's my superpower?
Creating hurricanes, causing earthquakes.
I don't want to do that. That doesn't seem like a nice superpower.
That's what you were handed when you were born. Deal with it.
Aw. You mean I don't get to choose how I am?
I'm hoping you got the joke there, by the way.
Yes.
I don't think you got the joke.
No, yeah, because of, like, Pat Robertson.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, X-Men is cool. There's a lot of corollaries with the way that it treats people who are different in the way that Star Trek does. Obviously, it's a little bit more... the commentary is a little bit stronger in the way that the mutants are treated by society, and that there's even a law passed in the X-Men realm where like people who are mutants have to register with the government, and yeah, there's lots of really strong commentary there. So the next one is Tony says JD in Scrubs made me feel okay with being a feminine guy. And oh my God, I love Scrubs.
Yes. Scrubs is great.
I'm not sure. There's only 2 shows that I can think of that are so good at being consistently funny, but when they want to hit you with the feels, holy shit, do they hit you with the feels.
Yeah.
Scrubs is one and MASH is the other one.
Oh, yeah. MASH is too.
Yeah, so that's awesome. You want to take the next one?
Jamie says, I don't know this character. So do you know this character,
Yeah.
Casey Jones? What is this from? What is it from?
He's a character in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Okay, Casey Jones was a regular dude who was actually a failure in a lot of ways, including as an athlete, but he was able to hang out with heroes and become one himself. So that was pretty tight.
Yeah, so Casey Jones is basically a guy who was a hockey player and not so good at it, and he met the Ninja Turtles, and if memory serves, he kind of started out as one of those characters that was kind of ambiguous, like, I'm not sure if he's a good guy or a bad guy, but turns out, he kind of turns into a good guy, and he's just kind of a hardcore badass. So it's like another kind of one of those, like the Punisher, where like this guy doesn't have any superpowers, he's just really pissed off and really strong and decides to be a badass. So yeah, I'm into that. Kaylee says, Harry Potter has been and continues to be an escape for me of the highest degree from all the bad stuff, mental illness, etc. I'm even planning on 3 separate tattoos dedicated to the series. It's always been like, if Sirius can survive 12 years in Azkaban and still make it through day-to-day life, then so can I, and things like that. Really, the fandom is like a huge, beautiful family that helps each other through the tough stuff. I have an embarrassing admission, Ari.
No, don't do it. Just skip it. I know what you're going to say.
Do you?
Yes, I do know what you're going to say.
What do you think I'm going to say?
You're going to say you don't know anything about Harry Potter.
Yeah. I feel like such a bad nerd. I've seen like half of one of the movies.
Whoa! I'm so disappointed.
No,
Harry Potter is another one that's a big one for me because I just grew up in that Harry Potter generation. And I actually, like, when I was a kid, I tried to be like a hipster and be like, I don't like Harry Potter because everyone else likes it, so I don't like it. And then my friend finally convinced me to read one of the books, and then I was just like, give me all the Harry Potter.
Well, see, and it means that much to my sister too, and I'm really glad. Like, I really do need to devote the time, because everything that I've heard about it makes me think that I would probably fall in love with it if I gave it the time.
It's beautiful.
Who's next?
Kyle said, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I resonate a lot with that character. There's a lot of reasons. The show tackled a lot of different issues and personified them as monsters. The storylines on coming out, dating violence, and sexual assault I found to be really empowering.
That's awesome. And that's another sort of... I'm not so embarrassed about this one. I don't know a ton about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I know there's a huge fandom surrounding it. And I think it's cool because Kyle is someone who is an advocate for people who deal with sexual violence and dating violence and that kind of thing. So it's awesome. Maybe that's part of what pushed him there. I don't know, but I think that's cool. Nat says, X-Men and Star Trek The Next Generation both had characters I could relate to, Loners like Wolverine and Rogue, Magneto's struggle with his anger and rage and how it colored his political aims, Data's struggle to understand how to be a humanoid, Wesley Crusher's frustration with not being taken seriously, the many struggles the crew has trying to understand Q or the Borg, and the puzzling nature of Phoenix and Dark Phoenix. I think a lot of other women can identify with feeling like they've lost control of their bodies. The many characters who live in a liminal space between two or more cultures or races or ideology, i.e. Worf or almost all of the X-Men. Both of these worlds have nuanced characters who are mostly not good or evil. They have something for everyone. They comfort and resonate with so many people because of that. They also represent the best efforts we can think of from the lens of white Western culture to unite species and cultures and nations to be accepting and curious of all our differences. For a born anthropologist loner like myself, it's an early primer for studying humanity. That's fantastic commentary.
Yeah, very thorough.
One of the things that I love so much about Star Trek is that it really tries to explore what it means to be human. So there's an android character named Data, and I can't remember if it's in the first or the second season, but there's a scientist who decides, like, I want to study Data, so I'm going to take him back here and take him apart. And so basically they put his rights on trial, and they actually have a trial where Captain Picard is arguing in favor of Data being granted human rights and autonomy. And so, and the episode's actually called The Measure of a Man. And so there's lots of really, really great commentary on what it means to be human. Where do we draw the line between who gets rights and who doesn't, and that kind of thing. I also love what she talked about, Wesley Crusher's frustration with not being taken seriously. So Wesley Crusher is a kid who was basically a genius, and no one took him seriously because he was a kid. And I am nothing resembling a genius, but I was always really frustrated when I would try and have, conversations with adults about things. If they were talking about something that I had some level of understanding of, or even like in school, that was one thing that really, really frustrated me. Is, people just like, well, you're a kid, what could you possibly know? And I'm like, well, yeah, maybe more if you would quit being an asshole and let me have a conversation with you, So yeah, and then the whole thing about, living between cultures and races and ideologies, that's not necessarily something that I can totally identify with, but that's, Worf is a really good example of that because he's Klingon and they're kind of always in Cold War with the Federation in one way or another. So like, is he Klingon, but he was raised by humans? And yeah, there's lots of great stuff in there, so.
I'm going to actually skip one, cause I'm sure you want to read the Star Trek ones, but this one is actually... This is one that I relate to a lot. Callie or Kali, K-A-L-I.
I think it's
said,
Kaylee,
Finding the Drunken Peasants podcast. Oh, Kaylee, okay. Finding the Drunken Peasants podcast probably helped save my life after a horrible breakup with the man I thought I was going to marry. Watching their podcast cheered me up and kept my mind off my stupid cheating ex. Ever since I found the podcast, I've been a loyal fan. The satire and comedy is uplifting for me at the end of a long and or stressful day. Listening to them made me not feel so alone after the ordeal. I'm so thankful I found them. I don't know how I would have pulled myself out of the depression I had without a little help from the upbeat, funny hosts' witty comments on current matters in the world. Thanks, Drunken Peasants, for your show. I'm very grateful. I am very happy that somebody mentioned podcasts because that is another big one for me.
Yeah, I am too. It is for me too.
Now being a part of the podcast world because it's like, especially like Callie, when I first started talking to you online, I was like freaking out. I was like, oh my God, it's Callie. This is awesome. Like I'm talking to Callie, right? Because I was listening to you and so many other people, so many podcasts that I listen to all the time and just really enjoying, like, it's almost like getting to know somebody. It's kind of weird because they don't know you back because you're not talking to them. They're just talking to you. But it's like getting to know someone and like making a friend and, getting to hear their thoughts and opinions. It's almost like a little world into itself. It's almost like a little fandom. Like Jeremiah and I talk about podcasts all the time. Like, what podcast did you listen to today? And we talk about our thoughts about what we thought about the podcasts. And it's kind of interesting because now we know a lot of those people, but they're also ones that we listen to where we don't know those people. So that, yeah, I definitely relate to that. And I'm really glad that someone brought up podcasts instead of lame TV shows.
Right. Well, I'm glad too, because I think, one, it is important to talk about because, podcasting was the first place that I really got into the idea of being part of the atheist community. I'd always been an atheist, but I always say podcasts weren't how I became atheist, but podcasts were definitely how I became an activist.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
And that's something that, I mean, really means something to me, and it's basically the all-consuming drive of my life at this point. So, I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that it really changed the trajectory of my life, and I can't necessarily point to any single one. There are a lot of them, but I think that's one of the cool things about the medium of podcasting is, as opposed to commercial radio, the hosts of podcasts, generally speaking, you get peppered in things about, even if their show isn't necessarily about things that are in their personal life, you definitely get to know their actual personal lives through the show. Like, if you listen to a show on NPR, there's lots of shows on NPR that are really great, but I basically know nothing about the hosts aside from their voices. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the cool things about podcasts, like you said, is you get to know people. So that's a great call out. And I think it's just a fantastic example of the fact that, when we're talking about fandoms and nerdiness, it doesn't have to be relegated to just one medium or another.
Yeah. And another great thing about podcasts is that you can actually contact the people who make them because they're real people.
Exactly. So Tina says, I was a fan of the original Star Trek when it first aired in 1966. It was so glorious to see not only aliens and humans exploring the universe together, but to see the likes of Lieutenant Uhura and Lieutenant Sulu on television. For those who may not know, Lieutenant Uhura is a black woman. Lieutenant Sulu is an Asian man. It was beyond my imagination to see an African American and an Asian American in leading roles on a network TV series. It definitely gave me hope for a new world back then. I was a fan then and am a fan now. I think it may be really tough for people to understand what a big deal that was. For people who are probably my age and younger, because I grew up in a world that obviously we still have lots and lots of problems with diversity. But when Star Trek came out, to have even one black person or one Asian person in an actual leading role was kind of unheard of. And there's even an episode where Uhura and Captain Kirk kiss each other, which was super scandalous at the time. A lot of people think it was the first interracial kiss on TV. It actually wasn't, but it was still super, super scandalous at the time. And there's a great story where Nichelle Nichols, the actress that plays Uhura, she was actually talking about quitting the show because she was kind of unhappy with how her character was being used in plots in the show. And she was talking about quitting, and I guess she was having a conversation with someone, telling them that, I'm not really going to do the show anymore. Somebody taps her on the shoulder and says, "You can't quit." She turns around and it's Martin Luther King. And he's like, "You're a black woman in a leading role on a TV show. You can't quit." And that was cool.
So I'm going to skip ahead to this one because it's something that I relate to a lot. And the show that she talks about is not one that I've actually seen, but a lot of the things that she says resonate with me personally about Full Metal Alchemist especially. I feel like now I need to watch this show because I'm like, wow, that's just like Full Metal Alchemist. Tara said, Supernatural. That is my go-to show when my depression and PTSD starts getting bad. Supernatural changed my life. I got PTSD as a result of emotional and physical abuse from both my parents. For a while, I felt like I was completely alone. I never had the family I knew I deserved, one that's loving, supportive, etc. There was a guy in the show named Bobby who served as a surrogate father for Sam and Dean because their dad was gone all the time, and he was quite frankly an asshole when he was around. Bobby once told Dean, family doesn't end in blood. Through that show, I learned that it doesn't have to start there either. I might not have the loving, supportive blood relatives I deserve, but I do have a family, and I'm not obligated to recognize my parents as part of that. Also, I can relate to Dean a lot. Because of crap I went through in childhood, I turned out very scarred and damaged. Dean has shit like that to deal with too, but he has also saved the world more than once. He has literally been to hell and back, but he's still fighting. And even though his childhood damaged him in some ways, he's still his own person with some amazing qualities. He's been treated like shit and taught to shut off all his emotions, but he still opens up to certain people. He still puts his heart out there despite the risks involved in doing so. He cares about his brother more than... This is so Full Metal Alchemist. Like, you can seriously just replace the characters' names, and this is Full Metal Alchemist. He cares about his brother more than anything in the world, including himself, and his love for Sam outshines all of his flaws. No one is 100% bad or damaged, no matter how horrific their childhood was. Even if it's difficult to see sometimes, everyone has amazing qualities they can put out there to make the world a better place. Dean, in a way, helped me look at myself that way instead of seeing myself as a fractured person who's unworthy of love. And the biggest thing it showed me is that I can be my own hero. If I sit around and wait for someone else to come into my life and save me, it might never happen. But no matter how damaged I might be and how weak I might feel, I'm capable of saving myself. Sure, I will probably need some help along the way, but I can be my own hero. Sam and Dean always find a way to overcome and survive no matter what they're faced with. They are the epitome of hope. They gave me hope during times of my life when I felt that there was none.
That's awesome. And Supernatural is a great show. I've only watched the first season, but it's a really, really great show. I hadn't really connected with it quite on that level, but I'm really glad that people do. That's awesome. I'm going to kind of skip around here too, because obviously we've kind of talked about Star Trek to death, so I may skip the next couple ones that are Star Trek, because there are other things that are great points about some of these things. So Seth and Daniel both talked about Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and this is kind of a big one for me too. It's not one that I talk about very much, but it's something that's huge for me too. So Seth's comment is, Lord of the Rings, particularly as it portrays emotional experience and interpersonal interactions. These characters all experience unbelievable quantities of grief together, and they experience it in different ways. They have weight to carry, and even the smallest can handle the greatest of burdens. In the end, as Aragorn sings his coronation song, flower petals are falling everywhere. There is celebration and joy, but you can see that there was an intense level of darkness to the experience that brought him to that point. A very wistful moment. It resonates with me because each of us bears a burden, but it's all about what we can become. And Daniel's comment kind of follows along the same lines. The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit both meant so much to me because of how one person can change the course of the world, and how, like with Aragorn, he had to be ready to be king of Gondor. He never wanted to be anything like his ancestors, especially Isildur, and it was like me, I never wanted to do to the world what had been done to me. The raw human emotion written into the books and movies showed me that feeling was okay, and that anger was a normal human emotion. It was how I expressed it that made me good or evil, and that one day, when I was ready, I could fulfill my potential and true destiny. I read The Hobbit when I am frustrated and hurting because it's better than any drug I could take, because I sit there and I am in the adventure. I see, feel, hear what the characters do, and it makes me happy. And that's a lot of what it means to me too. Even the people who are the smallest and who, in other circumstances might not have been of any significance to the broader world, those people, when they decide that they want to take on a burden, that they can change the world. And there's also lots of stuff in there about differing cultures and figuring out how to live with each other and work together towards a common goal. Lots of what's important in the world, and we're going to sacrifice for what matters to us. And there's also just lots of really badass one-liners in Lord of the Rings.
Which is the most important part.
Yeah. And like things with cool names, like the Horn of Helm Hammerhand.
Nice.
Which is, yeah. So which one do you want to do next, Ari?
This one mentions religion, so I think it would be really cool to read this one. This is from our friend Miss B from Promoting Secular Feminism. She said, and it also talks about psychology, so I can talk about this. Doctor Who helped me understand humanism, but much better during college. In studying psychology, there was a branch called humanistic psychology mentioned in several of my classes, and mostly in a somewhat negative light. From what I remember, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of research to back up the methods used in that particular branch of psychology, so most of my professors were very dismissive of it. It took me a long time to figure out that humanism and humanist psychology are different things, and yes, they are. I had been trying in college to hold on to these last vestiges of belief, going to Bible study groups and hanging out with the super Christian people. But I was also really into the new Doctor Who series, having remembered seeing a couple of episodes of the old series on TV as a kid, late night or early morning on PBS. And my first episode, I remember watching a VHS of The Leisure Hive, the name of the episode, with my high school friend's dad when I was over to make Christmas cookies. But in college, in an email exchange with one of my super Christian friends, I had made the statement that humans are basically good, and was promptly corrected about how the Bible tells us that people are basically sinful. That's what got me. How could the Doctor going around saving Earth all the time if he believed that humans were basically bad people? And I discovered that I hadn't really believed in all that religious bunk for quite some time. I wasn't sure if I'd ever really believed it. But one thing I was sure of, the Doctor feels we are good enough to be saved, and that is good enough for me. Whether people are basically good or bad, we have to stick together through it all in order to survive. And that is why I love Doctor Who so much, and we'll talk your ear off about it.
I love it. That's one of the things I love about it too. So So, kind of skipping around here, there's another one that hasn't been brought up yet. My friend Jeremy says Dragon Ball, as in Dragon Ball Z. Often shrugged off as being merely about kung fu fighting and shooting lasers with your hands, which, want to throw out, there's nothing wrong with either of those things. It would be okay if that was. But Dragon Ball is actually an epic story of 42 books, and it's really about perseverance, always pushing your limits, and being excited by new challenges and learning from them, even when you might not be able to face them. It's also about setting aside old rivalries and differences in order to fight a greater evil together. The backstory of some of those characters is pretty heartbreaking. It also explores every avenue of the fantasy genres. I could write way more. So I think that's cool, because I'm going to be honest and say I had gotten that idea about Dragon Ball just from watching Dragon Ball Z. I had a friend who was really into it, and every time I saw it, I was like, these are just two people staring at each other. Are they ever actually going to fight each other? And then they fight for like
screaming dramatically.
Yeah, it's like, oh, he's about to go Super Saiyan, and I'm like, you better fucking do it at some point. Like, how much longer we got here?
Here's one that is cool. This is also a show that I like a lot. This is from Elaine. I didn't think there was one when you first asked, talking about Callie asking about fandoms. I was basically raised by TV. Being autistic, it's so much easier to understand human beings by watching them on a screen, so shows have always been a big deal to me, but I couldn't think of any specific fandom that changed my life or helped me in particular. Then someone mentioned Community, which is a TV show. Before Community, the characters I related to best were ones like Data, Spock, and Seven of Nine, who didn't understand humans, social roles, and interactions. Abed Nadir has been the first character I've ever seen who's not an android, alien, or cyborg who I could really relate to over the things that make me different. He's the first character who's like me and still portrayed as human. Not just human, but he fits in with a group of friends, and people actually love him for his quirks, even when he's difficult. And he's obsessed with TV just like me for the same reasons that I am. I never thought I would be understood like that. Other portrayals of autistic characters mostly show us as people with no real social difficulties, but with useful, quote, superpowers to solve murders, or jerks who are burdens to their friends. I never realized it until I saw it, but Abed is the first character who's ever made me feel human. That's so sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's really sad that something like that is necessary, but I think that's a perfect illustration of the point that we're trying to make with the episode is how much these things really do mean to people on a very real level.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have, you know, so many diverse characters on TV, because you just see like the same like white, straight, cisgender, neurotypical characters over and over, and you feel like, you know, there's no one you can relate to on TV. But like with this, with what Elaine saw in Abed, she saw an autistic character that she could relate to, and wasn't just like some weird, freaky, like person who either everyone hated or had some kind of superpower that made them awesome. It was just like a normal person who had friends and had a meaningful life. And it was really meaningful for her to see someone like her on TV who was just a cool person. So I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, and I think that brings up kind of broader issues of representation in media. And I mean, we probably could and maybe should do an entire episode about that specific topic. But I think for people for whom this isn't a problem, it may be easy to dismiss the importance of seeing people that look like you or share characteristics with you on TV, or characters that you can relate to. And I think first and foremost, just on a level of wanting to enjoy content, you have to be able to relate with the characters in some way. You have to see at least part of yourself in a character to say like, oh, I'm more interested now because I have more in common with this person. But I think also on a deeper level, you know, if you grow up seeing, because let's be real, maybe this is a bad thing. We can argue whether it's a good or a bad thing, but I think what we see in movies and TV a lot of times becomes part of the narrative of what our culture is. And if all we see are these prototypical straight male, cis, white, Christian characters, and you know, the black people in the show are there for comic relief, or the fat people are there for comic relief, or the people who are quirky and maybe autistic are there for comic relief, or just as plot devices, as opposed to being characters who are part of the story and who matter. It's really easy, I think, for people who are in those positions to internalize those things as being the truth, because that's all you see, right? Mm. And I think it's really important to have diverse characters. I mean, both because we want to be able to relate to the things that we see because it makes it more fun. But I also think it sends a really important message. You know, if this trans kid sees a trans character on a TV show that they love, they're going to latch more onto that. Like, oh, wow, there's this character, so it maybe is a little more okay for me to be who I am. You know, and obviously there are a ton more factors in there. I mean, accepting parents and all of that kind of stuff. But obviously, you know, we're talking in the context of these kind of things. I think it's really, really important that we advocate for and push for things like that. So if I find out there's an openly gay or an openly trans character in the new Star Trek series, it may be one of the greatest days of my life. I'm just going to throw that out there. Because the producers of the show they actually said they wanted to do it in the 90s, but they weren't allowed. You know, they wouldn't get it past anyone. So that's why they put in on all of these allegories and these references that at the very, very surface, if you were just watching the story, that's not necessarily what it was about, but it was pretty obvious that's what they were trying to make the statement on. There are a couple of smaller comments that aren't as in-depth as the other ones, but they call out some things that I think are pretty cool. So I'm just gonna jump through these. Kenny says Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, which were both, if memory serves, they were both. I know Hitchhiker's Guide is Douglas Adams, but Dirk Gently is that Douglas Adams as well? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And he just said it taught me that it was good to accept being weird and to revel in it. And I think that's super important.
Yes, absolutely. Douglas Adams is a huge influence on my humor. So if you like my humor, read Douglas Adams.
Oh yeah. And I mean, if you just like funny things, because if you don't like Hitchhiker's Guide, you don't like funny things. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that.
That's absolutely correct.
Anne said the original Scooby-Doo taught me to be a skeptic. And
wow,
also
that's pretty awesome. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, well, and it also taught you that old white men in suits are usually the problem. That's a meme that I saw on Facebook. I can't take credit for having come up with that.
Yeah, there's no real monsters, you guys.
Yeah. And then Will says Nerd Fighteria, which this is one that I know absolutely nothing about, and I'm going to have to check out because it sounds pretty cool. Nerd Fighters are fans of brothers Hank and John Green. When we're all proud nerds who are unironically excited about the things we love. They're extremely accepting and clever and fun, though diverse in pretty much every area. And that sounds pretty awesome. Well, I think, that's about all the time we've got here. So,
man.
I know, nerding out's so much fun. So, like I said, all of the stuff that we talked about, I'm going to try and include links to all of it in the description box because even hardcore nerds probably, maybe, hopefully, found something that they may not have heard of that they wanted to check out here. So, I'll put as much of that as I can in the description box.
That's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing that I want to nerd out about. It's not even really a nerdy thing. It's just awesome.
What?
Kung Pao.
Oh, okay. I was hoping that's what you were saying.
Yes.
That's a lot of nuts. That'll be $5, baby. Oh, God.
If you need a silly movie to watch, if you're like feeling down and you just want something like mindless and funny to watch, please watch Kung Pao.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. Definitely want to thank everyone who contributed. Nerdiness is a lot of fun, but it also means a whole lot to a lot of people, and I really, really want to say that I appreciate how many people shared their nerdiness and what it means to them. If you think we missed anything, if you think we got anything wrong, definitely shout us out.
Keep it to yourself. We don't want to hear it.
Or that. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. And sigh.
Listener, we've been together for a long time now. When I first met you, I was captivated by your sweet smile, your upbeat attitude, your unique view of the world, and that adorable way that you viciously shove your fingers into the eye sockets of anyone who opposes you. As I got to know you better, I came to know you as a deep thinker, a born comedian, a talented belly dancer, and a compassionate and empathetic person who I can always reach out to for support and occasionally small loans. You've been there for me through thick and thin, and I think it's become pretty evident that not only do we love each other, but we complete one another. We bring out the best in each other, and without you by my side, I don't think I could be the sexy, brilliant, important, and modest person that I am today. We're not just like peanut butter and jelly, we're like wine and cheese, or Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, or Ray Comfort's cheek and Eli Bosnick's tongue. We belong together, and I can't imagine my future without you. Listener, will you make me the happiest queer in the world and friend me on Facebook at Ari Stillman or email me at aristillman4@gmail.com.
A modest proposal.
Nice.
If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. You can also head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.